My life has always been calm and measured. I worked in an office, lived in a small apartment, and occasionally met with friends. But everything changed when I received a letter from my old friend Alexander, whom I had not seen for many years. In the letter, he talked about his new house in a village located near the forest and invited me to visit. I decided to accept the invitation to escape from the bustle of the city. The road to the village was long and tiring. The road went through dense forests and hills, where other cars rarely met. Finally, I reached Alexander's house. It was an old house with stone walls and a roof covered with moss. Alexander met me at the threshold, and we hugged like old friends. The house inside was cozy and spacious. A fireplace was burning in the living room, creating a pleasant atmosphere. We sat down at the table, and Alexander began to talk about his life in the village. He mentioned strange things happening in the forest at night, strange sounds, shadows and lights that frightened the locals. I have always been a skeptic and did not believe in the supernatural, so I decided to check out what was happening in the forest myself. Alexander warned me, but I insisted. The next night I went into the forest, armed with a flashlight and a camera. The forest at night was a truly creepy place. Tall trees blocked the sky, and darkness enveloped everything around. I walked along a narrow path, listening to the sounds of the night forest, the rustling of leaves, the cries of night birds, and the rustling of small animals. Suddenly I heard a strange sound, reminiscent of crying. I pointed the flashlight in the direction of the sound and saw a shadow quickly disappearing into the depths of the forest. My heart began to beat faster, but I decided not to retreat and went on. After a while, I came across an old hut, half destroyed and overgrown with bushes. I carefully approached and looked inside. The hut was dark and damp. The floor was covered with mold and moss. In the corner, I noticed an old chest, half hidden under the rubble. I opened it and found old books and scrolls written in an incomprehensible language inside. Suddenly, I felt that someone was watching me. Turning around, I saw a figure in the shadows, standing motionless. I pointed the flashlight at it, but it disappeared. Frightened, I hurried to leave the hut and returned home. The next day, I told Alexander about my adventure. He listened to me with interest and suggested that we return to the hut together to explore it. We took flashlights with us and went into the forest. When we got to the hut, it was already late, and night had enveloped the forest again. We went inside and began to examine the finds. The books and scrolls turned out to be ancient records of rituals and spells aimed at summoning spirits. We realized that this place had once been used for dark rituals. Suddenly, we heard rustling and footsteps outside. Taking flashlights, we left the hut and saw several dark figures standing nearby. They looked at us without moving. We decided to return home, but the figures began to approach. We ran without looking back, but the figures followed us. Soon we ran out into a clearing and stopped, breathing heavily. The figures disappeared, but the fear did not leave us. We returned home and decided not to go into the forest at night anymore. The next day, we again studied the books and scrolls we had found. One of the books wrote about an ancient cult that worshipped the spirits of the forest and made sacrifices to them. We realized that those dark figures were spirits awakened by these rituals. We decided to perform a ritual to calm the spirits and return them to peace. We followed the instructions from the book, preparing the necessary ingredients and attributes. The ritual took place in the forest, on the site of an old hut. When we began to read the spells, the forest came to life. The tree branches began to move. The air was filled with whispers and sounds. Suddenly, those same dark figures appeared in front of us. They stood around us, watching the ritual. We continued to read the spells, and the figures began to slowly dissolve into the air. When the ritual was over, the forest became quiet and calm. We felt relief and the understanding that the spirits had finally found peace. We returned home and burned all the books and scrolls we found so that no one would use them for dark purposes anymore. Life in the village returned to normal, but the memories of that night remained with us forever. We realized that the world is full of secrets and mysteries that are best left unsolved. But if evil manifests itself again, we will be ready to meet it. A few years passed, and I returned to the city. Life became normal again, but those nights in the forest forever changed my attitude to the supernatural. I have learned that there are forces that defy logical explanation and that one must be careful with them. But if evil ever returns, I will be ready to stand up for those I love again.